3 weeks after my manager threatened to write up anyone who forgot to copy him on a work email, our biggest client nearly cancelled their contract, HR opened an internal investigation, and senior executives were scrambling to figure out how one simple rule had pushed an entire department to the edge. The unbelievable part: nobody ignored his order. Nobody argued. Nobody tried to embarrass him. We did exactly what he told us to do. Every email, every reply, every update, every single day. By the time he realized what was happening, it was already too late. The policy he created to control everyone had become the very thing that destroyed his own career. My name is Ethan, and until last year, I worked as a customer operations specialist for a mid-sized logistics company outside Chicago. My name is Ethan, and until last year, I worked as a customer operations specialist for a mid-sized logistics company outside Chicago. We weren't some flashy tech startup or a giant corporation. We handled freight contracts for hundreds of businesses across the Midwest, and every day felt like controlled chaos. Phones never stopped ringing. Emails poured in every minute. Customers wanted updates. Drivers needed paperwork. Sales wanted answers yesterday. Operations wanted miracles before lunch. It wasn't glamorous, but I actually enjoyed the work. The team was solid. Jessica sat across from me and somehow stayed cheerful no matter how stressful things became. Marcus had been there almost 15 years and knew every customer by name. Rachel handled scheduling with unbelievable speed, and Kevin was the unofficial office comedian who somehow made Monday mornings tolerable. Then our department manager retired. For about 3 weeks, things were peaceful while corporate searched for a replacement. Then they hired Daniel Harper. His first impression wasn't terrible. Expensive suit. Perfect haircut. Confident handshake. He spoke with the kind of confidence that made executives nod before he even finished a sentence. During his introduction he smiled and said he believed in accountability, efficiency, and transparency. At first, none of us had a problem with that. Those sounded like normal management buzzwords. The problem started during his first week. Daniel wanted updates every hour. Not every day. Every hour. He wanted spreadsheets tracking things nobody had ever tracked before. He wanted daily reports summarizing reports we had already submitted. He scheduled meetings just to prepare us for other meetings. He insisted every conversation be documented. If someone walked over to ask a simple question, he'd say, "Follow up with an email so we have documentation." It became exhausting. One afternoon I spent nearly 20 minutes writing an email confirming a conversation that had lasted less than 30 seconds. Nobody complained openly. We all assumed he was just trying to prove himself. Managers sometimes overdo things during their first month. Eventually they relax. Daniel didn't. He got worse. One Tuesday morning he called everyone into the conference room. He stood beside a PowerPoint presentation titled Communication Standards. The presentation had 27 slides. About emails. I wish I were joking. He spent nearly an hour explaining proper formatting, response times, signatures, subject lines, and documentation procedures. By the end of the meeting everyone looked mentally exhausted. Then he reached the final slide. He smiled. I've noticed some important conversations happen without management visibility. Nobody said anything. So starting today, every work-related email will include me in CC. The room stayed silent. He continued. I don't care if it's between co-workers. I don't care if it's answering a customer's simple question. I don't care if you're confirming lunch coverage. If it's work-related, I expect to be copied. Jessica slowly raised her hand. What if the email has nothing to do with management? Daniel smiled politely. If it's work-related, it has something to do with management. Marcus frowned. That's going to be a lot of emails. Daniel folded his arms. Good. I want visibility. I can't manage what I can't see. Nobody argued after that. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. This isn't optional. If I discover work emails where I wasn't copied, disciplinary action will follow. The room immediately became uncomfortable. He looked around. Questions. Nobody spoke. Meeting over. As we walked back toward our desks, Kevin leaned toward me. He'll regret this. I shrugged. Maybe. Jessica sighed. My inbox already gives me anxiety. Marcus laughed quietly. Imagine his. That afternoon Daniel sent an official company-wide email. The subject line read Updated Communication Policy. It clearly stated that every employee in operations must copy Daniel Harper on every internal and external work email without exception. Failure to comply could result in written disciplinary action. He even highlighted that sentence in yellow. HR was copied. The operations director was copied. Everyone received it. I saved the email. Mostly because I had a feeling I'd need it someday. Over the next few days we did exactly what he wanted. Every customer update. CC Daniel. Every scheduling request. CC Daniel. Every invoice question. CC Daniel. Every vacation request. CC Daniel. Every clarification. CC Daniel. Every internal discussion. CC Daniel. Even messages asking where someone had saved the spreadsheet. CC Daniel. By Friday afternoon my sent folder looked ridiculous. Daniel had been copied on nearly 400 emails from our department alone. And that was just one day. Monday morning he walked into the office looking irritated. He hadn't even sat down before calling out my name. Ethan. I looked up. You forgot to respond all on yesterday's shipping confirmation. I blinked. I replied directly to the customer. You should have replied all, so everyone has visibility. I nodded calmly. Understood. He stared for another second. Then walked away. Jessica whispered across the aisle. Did he seriously check that? I think he did. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I told you. He's reading these. That realization changed everything. People stopped trying to reduce unnecessary emails. Instead they became afraid of missing Daniel on anything. Questions that once took a 30-second conversation now became 5 email chains. Every clarification generated another reply. Every reply generated another acknowledgement. Every acknowledgement generated another thank you. And Daniel appeared on every single message. Exactly as requested. 3 days later he sent another email. Please avoid unnecessary conversations in person. Use email whenever practical so communication remains documented. Kevin looked at me after reading it. He actually wants more emails. I nodded. Looks like it. Kevin grinned. Well, if that's what the boss wants. He clicked new message. For the first time since Daniel arrived, I noticed everyone smiling. The next morning, the office felt different. Nobody said it out loud, but we had all reached the same conclusion. If Daniel wanted complete visibility, then complete visibility was exactly what he was going to get. At 8:02 a.m. Jessica sent me an email asking if I had the revised pricing sheet for one of our customers. She copied Daniel. Instead of walking 10 feet to my desk and handing it to her, I replied with the attachment. I copied Daniel. Marcus replied that he had also updated the transportation notes. He copied Daniel. Rachel jumped into the conversation because scheduling had changed overnight. She copied Daniel. Kevin replied with a corrected pickup time. He copied Daniel. Within 4 minutes, one simple question had become a 12-email conversation. Every single message included Daniel. Nobody was trying to be difficult. We were following the written policy exactly. Around 10 that morning, Daniel walked through the department carrying his laptop. His expression wasn't nearly as confident as it had been the week before. He stopped beside Jessica's desk. Did all of these emails really require me? Jessica looked genuinely confused. I wasn't sure, Daniel. Your policy says every work-related email. He hesitated. Well, yes. I just mean. She smiled politely. I didn't want to risk disciplinary action. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Finally, he nodded. Right. He walked away. Jessica waited until he disappeared into his office before looking at me. I answered honestly. You did, I whispered. By lunchtime, Daniel's inbox had become the unofficial joke of the department. Not because anyone was mocking him. Because everyone knew exactly what was happening. Every 5 seconds, another notification. Another reply. Another customer update. Another scheduling confirmation. Another internal question. Another approval request. Another shipping change. Another invoice correction. Another thank you email. Every single one included Daniel. At 1:15 p.m. I received an email from him. Ethan, next time, combine related updates into fewer emails. I stared at the screen for a second. Then I opened the original policy. It clearly stated that every work-related communication should be documented through email. Not grouped. Not summarized. Documented. I politely replied. Thanks for the clarification, Daniel. Just to make sure I'm following company policy correctly, should I still document each individual communication separately if they occur at different times? I copied HR. I copied Daniel. 5 minutes later he responded. Yes. Each communication should be documented individually. Perfect. That was all I needed. The rest of the afternoon became even busier. Instead of waiting until the end of the day to answer customer questions together, I answered each one immediately. Every response. CC Daniel. Every correction. CC Daniel. Every follow-up. CC Daniel. Every attachment. CC Daniel. By 3 o'clock, Outlook had started freezing. Not mine. Daniel's. We knew because he stormed out of his office carrying his laptop. IT. One of the technicians walked over. My Outlook keeps locking up. The technician checked a few things. Looks like you're receiving a very large volume of emails. Daniel sighed. I know that. It shouldn't freeze. The technician shrugged. You've received over 1,200 emails today. The entire office went silent. 1,200. And it wasn't even 4 in the afternoon. Daniel looked around the room. For the first time, he looked nervous. That afternoon another problem appeared. A long-time customer called asking why nobody had answered an urgent request. I checked the records. We had replied almost an hour earlier. The customer insisted they never received anything. After a few minutes of searching, we discovered the problem. Daniel had accidentally replied to the email chain while trying to clear his inbox. His reply changed the routing on the conversation. The customer's response had gone into Daniel's inbox instead of our shared operations mailbox. He never saw it. The shipment sat untouched for almost an hour. Fortunately, we caught it before it became a disaster. Daniel blamed Outlook. Nobody argued. Thursday morning, he held another meeting. I need everyone to use better judgment. Marcus raised his hand. What do you mean? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Some emails don't necessarily require. Then he stopped. Jessica spoke carefully. I'm sorry. I thought every work-related email required you in CC. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Generally. Kevin asked the obvious question. So, which ones don't? Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it again. Finally he said, just use common sense. The room became completely quiet. Marcus slowly lifted a printed copy of the policy email. It says every work-related email. Daniel looked at the paper. Yes. So if I decide something doesn't need you, I could still be written up. Daniel didn't answer immediately. After several awkward seconds, he finally said, technically. Marcus nodded. Then I'll keep copying you. So will I, Jessica added. Rachel agreed. I don't want disciplinary action. Kevin smiled. Me neither. Daniel dismissed the meeting less than 2 minutes later. As we walked back to our desks, Kevin whispered, he just realized he's trapped. I couldn't disagree. Because he was. His own written policy had removed all flexibility. If he told one employee not to copy him, he'd be contradicting the official company policy. If he kept enforcing it, his inbox would continue exploding. Either way, he had created the problem himself. Friday arrived. Normally Fridays were quieter. Not this one. By 9:30 a.m. Daniel had already sent 3 department-wide emails asking people to avoid unnecessary replies. Nobody ignored him. We simply responded individually. Each response included Daniel. Exactly as required. Then something happened that none of us expected. Around 11, the operations director walked into Daniel's office carrying a printed stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick. The door stayed closed for almost 40 minutes. Nobody could hear the conversation. When Daniel finally came out, his face had lost all color. He walked directly to his desk, sat down, and stared silently at his computer screen. 5 seconds later, another notification appeared. Then another. Then another. Then another. The sound of incoming emails echoed through the office almost non-stop. Daniel slowly closed his eyes. For the first time since he'd arrived, he looked completely overwhelmed. None of us knew it yet. But that was only the beginning of his problems. By the following Monday, everyone in the department had settled into a new routine. Nobody questioned the policy anymore. Nobody complained. Nobody tried to find shortcuts. We simply followed Daniel's instructions exactly as they were written. If a customer emailed asking whether a shipment had left the warehouse, Daniel was copied. If accounting asked for an invoice number, Daniel was copied. If Rachel needed Marcus to approve a delivery window, Daniel was copied. If Kevin asked whether anyone wanted coffee before his lunch break because he'd be gone for 20 minutes, Daniel was copied. It wasn't technically personal. It was related to the workday. So Daniel was copied. His inbox became a living nightmare. I knew because one afternoon he accidentally shared his screen during a Teams meeting. Before he could open the spreadsheet he wanted to show us, everyone saw the notification count. Over 23,000 unread emails. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. Daniel quickly stopped sharing his screen, but the damage was done. Jessica looked at me without saying a word. I could tell she was trying not to smile. Later that day, Daniel walked over to my desk. Ethan. Do you have a minute? Of course. He lowered his voice. I need you to start using more judgment. I looked genuinely confused. I'm sorry. Not every email needs me. I blinked. I thought the policy required every work-related email. It does. He paused. But not every single one. I opened Outlook. I just want to make sure I understand. I clicked on his original announcement. This says every work-related email. He nodded impatiently. Yes. So if I stop copying you, and later you decide I should have, I could still receive disciplinary action. His shoulders dropped. I suppose. I really don't want to violate policy. I appreciate your commitment. He forced a smile that looked painful. Just, do your best. I always do. He walked away looking even more frustrated than when he'd arrived. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. I documented it in an email. To summarize our conversation, I will continue following the written communication policy until I receive updated written instructions. Thank you for your clarification. I copied Daniel. I copied HR 5 minutes later. HR replied. Thank you for documenting the conversation. Please continue following the current written policy. Daniel never responded. Tuesday morning brought another unexpected problem. One of our largest customers called asking for Daniel directly. That had never happened before. Apparently, because he was copied on every conversation, the customer assumed he was personally overseeing their account. Daniel spent almost 45 minutes on the phone answering questions that our team could have handled in 5. When he finally hung up, another customer was already waiting. Then another. Then another. Customers had started replying directly to him because his name appeared in every email thread. Without realizing it, Daniel had made himself the primary contact for dozens of accounts. His calendar disappeared beneath phone calls. His inbox continued growing. His actual management responsibilities stopped getting done. By Wednesday, executives began noticing. The operations director stopped by our department. He wasn't smiling. He called Daniel into a private meeting. The glass walls of the conference room made it impossible to hear anything, but everyone could see the conversation. The director pointed toward a stack of printed reports. Daniel defended himself. The director interrupted him. Daniel tried explaining again. The director shook his head. After nearly half an hour, Daniel left looking exhausted. Jessica quietly leaned toward me. I've never seen him look like that. Neither had I. Around 2 that afternoon, another email arrived from Daniel. Effective immediately, avoid replying with unnecessary acknowledgements such as thank you, sounds good, or understood. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Because there was one small problem. The policy about copying him on every work-related email was still active. Less than a minute later, Marcus sent me a shipping update. I replied with the corrected paperwork. Daniel was copied. Rachel replied confirming the schedule. Daniel was copied. Kevin replied confirming the driver's availability. Daniel was copied. Nobody wrote thanks. Nobody wrote sounds good. We simply continued working. The volume of emails barely changed. Daniel's attempt to reduce notifications had accomplished almost nothing. Thursday morning, IT sent someone back to Daniel's office. Apparently his mailbox had reached its storage limit. The technician spent nearly an hour archiving emails just so Outlook would function again. As the technician packed up, I overheard him say something that caught my attention. I've honestly never seen one mailbox grow this fast. Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the screen. Then came Friday. And Friday was when everything finally started falling apart. At 8:47 that morning, a customer sent an urgent message marked high importance. Their shipment contained medical equipment worth several $1 million. The delivery address had changed overnight. The correction had to be processed immediately. Rachel saw the email. She updated the records. She sent the revised instructions. Daniel was copied. Marcus confirmed the driver assignment. Daniel was copied. I verified the paperwork. Daniel was copied. Everything looked perfect. Except one thing. The driver never received the final approval. For almost an hour, nobody understood why. Then IT traced the issue. Daniel had accidentally dragged the entire email conversation into a folder while trying to organize his overflowing inbox. Because he had become part of every communication chain, several automatic routing rules redirected later replies into folders nobody monitored. The approval email disappeared. The truck waited. The customer waited. The warehouse waited. And every minute cost the company money. When the mistake was finally discovered, the operations director personally walked into Daniel's office. This time, he didn't close the door. Everyone heard the first sentence. How did this happen? Daniel looked at the email chain. Then at the policy. Then back at the director. For the first time since he became our manager, he didn't have an answer. And judging by the expression on the director's face, that silence had just become far more expensive than anyone realized. The office was completely silent after the operations director walked out of Daniel's office. Nobody looked at anyone else. Everyone simply went back to work. Or at least, we tried to. About 20 minutes later, I received a meeting invitation marked mandatory. Attendees included Daniel, the operations director, HR, and every member of our department. The meeting was scheduled for 1 o'clock. That alone was unusual. Normally, HR only attended meetings involving disciplinary issues or major policy changes. At exactly 1 o'clock, we filed into the conference room. Daniel stood near the screen, but this time he wasn't leading the meeting. The operations director was. He looked exhausted. He took a deep breath before speaking. I'll keep this simple. Our department has experienced a significant increase in communication volume over the past several weeks. Nobody spoke. He continued. We've also experienced delayed customer responses, missed approvals, duplicate work, and several preventable operational failures. He clicked to the next slide. A graph appeared on the screen. Email traffic had nearly quadrupled in less than a month. Another slide showed average response times. They had almost doubled. Another showed overtime costs. Those had climbed sharply because employees spent so much time documenting every conversation. The director looked around the room. Can anyone explain why this happened? Daniel immediately cleared his throat. I believe employees may have misunderstood the intent of the communication policy. The room stayed quiet. HR looked down at her notes. The director frowned. What exactly was misunderstood? Daniel hesitated. I never intended to be copied on every single email. Marcus slowly raised his hand. May I say something? The director nodded. Marcus reached into a folder and placed a printed document on the table. I kept a copy of the policy. The director picked it up. Daniel's face immediately changed. The director read the highlighted sentence out loud. Every work-related email must include Daniel Harper in CC. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. He looked back at Daniel. Did you write this? Daniel quietly answered. Yes. The director continued reading. There are no exceptions listed. No. No clarification. No guidance. No examples. Daniel shifted in his chair. I expected people to use common sense. Jessica spoke for the first time. We wanted to. But we were afraid of disciplinary action. Rachel nodded. So we followed the written policy. Kevin added calmly, exactly as instructed. Nobody sounded angry. Nobody sounded sarcastic. We were simply answering the question. HR finally spoke. Were any employees ever warned for failing to copy Daniel? Daniel looked uncomfortable. There were verbal reminders. I quietly raised my hand. I received one. The director looked at me. What happened? I explained exactly what had happened during my reply all conversation. Then I opened my laptop. I also documented our follow-up conversation. I forwarded the email to everyone in the meeting. Within seconds, notification sounds echoed around the room. The director opened it first. He read silently. Then he looked at HR. HR read it next. Then she slowly looked toward Daniel. The email clearly showed that I had asked for clarification. It also showed HR instructing me to continue following the written policy. The room became very quiet. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I was trying to improve accountability. The director nodded slowly. I understand. But accountability and operational paralysis are not the same thing. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. The evidence spoke for itself. The director changed slides again. This graph was even worse. It showed Daniel's mailbox. Daily email volume before the policy. Around 100 emails. Daily email volume after the policy. Nearly 2,000. The director sighed. You became the bottleneck. Daniel stared at the screen. The director continued. When customers saw your name copied on every message, they assumed you were personally managing their accounts. Another slide appeared. It listed customer complaints. Most of them said the same thing. Waiting for Daniel. Waiting for management approval. Waiting for responses. The irony was painful. Nobody had ever needed Daniel's approval. Customers only thought they did because his name appeared everywhere. The director closed the presentation. I'm suspending this communication policy immediately. Nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. We simply nodded. He wasn't finished. Effective now, employees should only copy managers when management involvement is actually necessary. Jessica quietly whispered, finally. The director heard her. He smiled slightly. I think everyone here agrees. Then he looked directly at Daniel. I'll need you to stay after the meeting. Those words landed heavily. Everyone understood what they meant. As we left the conference room, Daniel remained seated. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked defeated. Back at my desk, Outlook suddenly felt quiet. For the first time in weeks, my inbox wasn't exploding every few seconds. People walked over to each other's desks again instead of sending 3 emails about a 30-second conversation. The office almost immediately became more productive. Around 4 o'clock, Daniel finally walked out of the conference room. He wasn't carrying his laptop. Just a small folder. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He quietly gathered a few personal items from his office. His family photo. A coffee mug. A notebook. Nothing else. Then he walked past our desks without saying a word. Kevin looked at me after the elevator doors closed. Do you think he's coming back tomorrow? I honestly didn't know. But something told me, the story wasn't over yet. Monday morning felt strangely peaceful. There were no department-wide emails waiting in my inbox. No reminders about documentation. No new communication standards. No color-coded charts explaining how to write an email. Just work. For the first time in over a month, everyone walked into the office without that feeling of tension hanging over us. Jessica stopped by my desk with a cup of coffee. I forgot how quiet this place used to be. I smiled. I was thinking the same thing. Marcus rolled his chair over. Has anyone heard anything? Before either of us could answer, Rachel walked in carrying a folder. I talked to someone in HR. Kevin immediately looked interested. And they haven't officially announced anything yet. But Daniel isn't managing our department anymore. The entire room went silent. Nobody celebrated. Nobody clapped. It was more like everyone let out the same deep breath at the same time. Around 9 o'clock, the operations director called another department meeting. This one lasted less than 10 minutes. He stood in front of us with a much calmer expression than we'd seen all week. I wanted to thank everyone for your professionalism during the past several weeks. He looked around the room. I know the communication policy created unnecessary challenges. Several people nodded. I've completed my review. He paused for a moment. It is clear that every employee followed written instructions exactly. Nobody reacted. Because that was simply the truth. He continued. No employee will receive any disciplinary action related to this situation. I noticed Jessica visibly relax. So, moving forward, we're returning to the communication procedures that existed before the policy change. He smiled slightly. If you can solve a problem by walking 10 feet to someone's desk, please walk 10 feet. The room filled with quiet laughter. It was probably the first genuine laugh we'd shared since Daniel arrived. Then someone in the back asked the question everyone was thinking. What happened to Daniel? The director took a careful breath. I won't discuss personnel matters. However, he looked at all of us. I will say this. Leadership exists to remove obstacles, not create them. And that's all I'll say. The meeting ended. That afternoon everything felt faster. Questions that had taken 6 emails now took 30 seconds. Customers received answers almost immediately. Shipping delays disappeared. The phone stopped ringing with complaints. Even IT seemed happier. One of the technicians walked through our department and joked, "Our email servers thank you." By the end of the week, productivity reports were already improving. Customer response times dropped back to normal. Overtime expenses fell dramatically. The department was running better than it had in months. I figured that would be the end of the story. I was wrong. About 3 weeks later, I received an email from someone I hadn't expected. It was Daniel. There was no one else copied. The subject line simply read "Request." I opened it. He wanted me to forward copies of several project emails because he no longer had access to his old mailbox. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I checked company policy. Former managers who transferred internally could request project documentation through their new department supervisor. Employees weren't allowed to send archived records directly. The rule existed for security reasons. Daniel had actually helped approve that policy years earlier. So I replied politely. "Hi Daniel. I'd be happy to assist. Unfortunately, company policy requires all documentation requests to go through your current department manager. Once I receive the approved request through the proper process, I'll send everything immediately. Thank you." I clicked send. A few minutes later he replied, "Can't you make an exception this once?" I smiled. Then I opened the employee handbook. "No exceptions." I replied again. "I'd like to help, but I have to follow company policy exactly." Less than a minute later, no response. Jessica walked over. "You look amused." I turned my monitor toward her. She read the exchange. Then she burst out laughing. "He really asked the wrong person. I wasn't trying to be difficult." "I know. You were just following policy." "Exactly." A few days later I ran into Daniel in the company cafeteria. He had been reassigned to an administrative role in another division. He looked tired. Not angry. Just older somehow. He walked over. "I owe you an apology." That surprised me. He continued. "I thought I was improving accountability. I never realized what I was creating." I nodded. "I know." He looked down for a second. "When you kept copying me on everything, I honestly thought you were trying to make my job harder." I smiled politely. "I was trying to keep mine." For a second, neither of us said anything. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. A quiet, embarrassed laugh. "I guess I walked into that one." "You did." He extended his hand. "No hard feelings." I shook it. "No hard feelings." Because there really weren't. I had never wanted revenge. I had never tried to embarrass him. I had simply followed the written instructions exactly as they were given. Sometimes that's all malicious compliance really is. You don't fight the rule. You don't break the rule. You simply allow the rule to reveal whether it was ever a good idea in the first place. A month later, our company introduced a new management training program. One of the first lessons focused on writing clear workplace policies. The instructor used an anonymous real-life example about a manager who insisted on being copied on every email. Nobody mentioned Daniel by name. They didn't have to. Everyone in the room already knew the story. And every new manager learned the same lesson. The most dangerous policy in any company isn't the one employees ignore. It's the one they follow perfectly. About 6 months passed, and life at the office returned to normal. Actually, it became better than normal. Without realizing it, Daniel's policy had exposed dozens of small problems that had existed long before he arrived. During the review process, executives discovered that several approval steps were completely unnecessary. Reports that had taken an hour every morning were reduced to 10 minutes. 3 different email templates were eliminated because nobody actually used the information inside them. Weekly meetings were shortened from 90 minutes to 30. The operations director joked that the most expensive management mistake in company history had accidentally made the company more efficient. Nobody argued with him. One afternoon, the director stopped by my desk. "Ethan, you have a minute?" "Sure." We walked into one of the small meeting rooms. "I've been reviewing everything that happened." I nodded. He smiled. "You know what impressed me the most?" I wasn't sure where he was going with this. "You never complained. You never argued. You never ignored instructions. You simply followed the written policy." I figured that was the safest option. It was. He leaned back in his chair. "Most people think professionalism means always agreeing with management. It doesn't. Sometimes professionalism means following instructions carefully enough that leadership can clearly see the consequences of its own decisions." That sentence stayed with me. Before leaving the room, he added something else. "We're promoting Marcus to operations supervisor next month." I smiled. "That's well deserved." "It is. And we'd like you to help train new employees." That caught me off guard. "Me? You've earned a reputation." "For what?" He laughed. "For documenting everything." For the first time in months, I laughed too. A few weeks later, we welcomed 3 new employees. During orientation, I explained how our department handled communication. One of the new hires asked, "Has it always been this simple?" Jessica laughed from across the room. "No. Trust me. You should have seen it 6 months ago." The room chuckled. The new employees assumed she was exaggerating. They had no idea. Near the end of the training session, HR handed everyone a revised communication handbook. The first page contained one sentence highlighted in blue. Managers should only be included in communications when their participation creates value. I couldn't help smiling. One sentence. That was all it took. The old handbook had contained nearly 4 pages of complicated communication rules. Now the company had reduced everything to one simple principle. If someone needed to be involved, include them. If they didn't, don't. Simple. Clear. Effective. Around Christmas, the company held its annual holiday dinner. Awards were handed out. Teams celebrated another successful year. Near the end of the evening, the CEO gave a short speech. He thanked everyone for adapting during a year filled with unexpected challenges. Then he said something interesting. "The best improvements sometimes come from our biggest mistakes." Most people probably thought he was speaking generally. Those of us from operations knew exactly what he meant. After dinner, Kevin walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. "Remember when Daniel first showed us that PowerPoint?" I laughed. 27 slides. About emails. Kevin shook his head. "I still can't believe that happened." The funny part is, what if he'd simply asked us to copy him on important issues? We probably would have done it without question. I nodded. Instead, he asked for everything. And he got exactly that. We stood there laughing for a moment. Not because Daniel had failed, but because the entire situation had been so avoidable. Before leaving for the night, I walked past the conference room where it had all started. The projector was off. The chairs were neatly arranged. It looked like any ordinary meeting room. It was hard to believe one presentation inside that room had changed so many careers. Sometimes people think malicious compliance is about getting even. For me, it never was. I didn't wake up each morning planning to outsmart my manager. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I wasn't looking for revenge. I simply believed that if a company creates a rule, employees should be able to follow it exactly. If following the rule causes everything to fall apart, maybe the problem was never the employees. Maybe the problem was the rule itself. Looking back now, I still don't regret a single email. Not one. Because every message I sent followed the policy perfectly. Every reply. Every attachment. Every update. Every customer response. Every internal question. Every single one. Exactly as instructed. And that's the part people usually miss when they hear this story. Daniel didn't lose his position because anyone disobeyed him. He lost it because everyone listened. Every instruction. Every word. Every email. Exactly the way he wanted. Sometimes the strongest form of resistance isn't refusing to follow an unreasonable rule. It's proving that the rule never made sense to begin with. And to this day, whenever someone jokes about copying the entire office on an email, everyone in operations smiles. Because we all remember the manager who wanted to see every message. And we remember how, in the end, he got exactly what he asked for. About a year after everything happened, I was cleaning out an old folder in Outlook when I found Daniel's original email. The subject line still read, "Updated Communication Policy." I opened it out of curiosity. Every work-related email must include Daniel Harper in CC. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. That was it. 2 sentences had turned an efficient department into complete chaos. I almost deleted the email. Then I decided to keep it. Not because I wanted a reminder of Daniel, but because I wanted a reminder of something much bigger. Good leadership isn't about controlling every conversation. It's about trusting the people you hired. A few months later, our company hired another department manager. Whenever someone new takes over, people are usually nervous. We all were. On his first day, the new manager introduced himself with a smile. "My door is always open. If something is urgent, call me. If you need my input, include me. If you don't, I trust you to handle your jobs." The room was completely silent. Then Kevin quietly leaned over and whispered, "I already like this guy." I almost laughed out loud. Within a few weeks, the difference was impossible to ignore. Projects moved faster. Customers were happier. People actually talked to each other instead of hiding behind endless email chains. The office felt like a team again. One afternoon, the new manager walked over to my desk. "I've heard there was an interesting email policy before I got here." I smiled. "You could say that." He laughed. I asked IT why our management training spends 20 minutes talking about unnecessary CCS. "So that's where it came from." I nodded. "It is." He shook his head. One person really wanted to be copied on everything. Every single thing. He laughed again. "I don't even want to be copied on half the emails I get now." That was probably the healthiest management philosophy I'd heard in years. A few days before my work anniversary, HR asked if I would speak to a group of newly promoted supervisors about communication. I wasn't a manager. I wasn't an executive. So I asked why they wanted me. The HR director smiled. Because you're the person who lived through the consequences. During the session, one supervisor asked me a question. If you knew how everything would turn out, would you still have copied Daniel on every email? I didn't even have to think about it. Yes. The room became quiet. I continued. Because the policy wasn't optional. If I had ignored it, I would have become the problem. By following it exactly, the policy exposed itself. Several people slowly nodded. Another supervisor raised his hand. So what's the lesson? I smiled. Never create a rule you wouldn't want followed perfectly. Nobody wrote anything down. They didn't need to. You could tell that sentence had landed. As everyone left the room, the HR director stopped beside me. I think you just saved us from a few future disasters. I hope so. When I got back to my desk, I opened Outlook to answer a customer's question. I wrote my reply. I attached the document they needed. I clicked send. No unnecessary CC. No pointless approvals. No endless reply all chain. Just one email sent to the right person. Exactly the way it should have been all along. Sometimes people ask me if Daniel was a bad person. Honestly, I don't think he was. I think he was a manager who believed more control automatically meant better leadership. He confused visibility with productivity. Documentation with efficiency. Oversight with trust. By the time he realized the difference, it was too late. His own policy had already become the evidence against him. And that's why this story has stayed with me all these years. Not because a manager lost his position. Not because our department survived a month of absolute chaos. But because I learned something I'll never forget. The fastest way to discover whether a workplace rule is truly smart, is to watch what happens when every employee follows it perfectly.